Hello, it's Gaetan Klein, and in this video today I want to talk about the double empathy problem and how it relates to autism. So there is a big misconception about autism that would say that autistic people lack empathy, that we don't have empathy. And for us, wherever on the spectrum we are, when we hear that we don't have empathy, it seems really wrong. It's not true and it hurts. Because most of the time, autistic people have empathy and they are compassionate and they care about people, they want to help, and we want to, have connection, reach out and help people. So when our positive intentions are met with rejection or misunderstanding, it hurts and it can be increasingly difficult to establish that connection because we have empathy, but we don't know how to give to other people what they would see as empathy. So this mismatch in the communication is something that is not the fault of people who have autism at all. It is just a mismatch in the type of communication that both neurotypes are using. So autistic people are a certain neurotype and non-autistic people have a different way of thinking, a different way of receiving information in communication and in relationship to others, and different ways of interpreting communication depending on the neurotype you're on. And the problem is that between those two neurotypes there is a mismatch, there is a disconnect that makes it difficult for both neurotypes to understand each other. But people who are within one neurotype generally have a lot of easiness to connect with people in the same neurotype. So two people who are autistic could get along pretty well and communicate easily and understand each other. And obviously neurotypical people can understand each other also very well. So the mismatch is between the two neurotypes. It's not between autistic people and the rest because that's their flow. No. Autistic people have empathy, but they have a different way of understanding communication and experiencing communication. But I also understand why neurotypical people sometimes don't understand autism and they have difficulty to relate to people who have autism because they haven't learned, they haven't been prepared, they don't know what it is. And so they act with misconceptions. So let's clarify all that. So let me give you an example of the mismatch between autistic people and non-autistic people in terms of empathy. I was talking with somebody who has been diagnosed with Asperger syndrome recently, and he was giving me the example, if somebody starts to cry besides me, I don't know what to do. I look at that person and I'm thinking, why is she crying and what does that mean and what should I do? And generally I don't do much because I don't know what that person needs. So that man have a lot of empathy and he's compassionate. But in those situations, he just doesn't know what the other person needs. And neurotypical people could see that as a lack of empathy, but it's not that that man doesn't have empathy, it's just that there is a mismatch between his neurotype and the other person's neurotype. So when you ask neurotypical people what to do in case somebody starts to cry, they would mostly say, oh, you have to be there, stay with that person, talk to her, reassure her, and talk to her so you can help her go through this. That's a typical response from extroverted people. But people with autism generally have a very different response. They would say, oh, that person needs space. They don't need to have too much sensory input. They don't want to be touched on the shoulders. They need to be left alone so they can process it. And that is the best response. And they think this way because that's what they would need. Okay, because if we have autism, generally we don't want too much sensory inputs because it overloads us, and we prefer to be in our space to process it and feel better. So it's an introverted response. Both responses are correct depending on what the person needs. It's not that one is better than the other, it depends on the neurotype and how is your natural inclination to what you need and how you want people to behave with you. So those two types have a mismatch. They don't really understand each other, but they are both right. And that is a double empathy problem. Autistic people have no problem relating with other autistic people because they understand their communication style, while non-autistic people, neurotypical people, have a different style and they're accustomed to using that style because they are the majority. So it's easier for them to assume that this is always the case, and they don't understand the way of functioning and the communication style of autistic people. So what to do about it? Well, education. We need to explain to people that different neurotypes exist and how they can understand each other. For example, we need to explain to neurotypical people that autistic people generally don't understand second degrees, or they cannot read between the lines or understand metaphors in the same way. It's more difficult. They have an extra effort to do to understand implied language. So when you recognize that somebody is in that category, you would talk to them in a more direct, simple way, in a way. Not simple in the sense that it's that you would think that they can't understand things, but you would talk to them in a way that is matching their neurotype, if that makes sense. And the same way around, for people who have autism, they can understand that people who are non-autistic generally need something else, and they need more rapport, more human contact, and they like being touched, for example. And it's something that you have to learn, because it would be too bad that both neurotypes stay just with each other and don't talk to one another and stay separated. It doesn't have to be this way, in my opinion. If we understand each other, then we can adapt our communication style and find bridges between the two styles. Now, the reason why there is such a mismatch is not inherently because of the neurological pathways and functioning that is set up this way, but it's generally because there is a feeling of separation that is represented by something I call the wall of glass experience. So the wall of glass experience is something pretty typical from Asperger syndrome, but we don't use Asperger syndrome as a label anymore. So it's an experience that there is something like an invisible barrier between you and the rest of people and the rest of the world. And it creates this disconnection and this difficulty to understand the other people, but also to be understood by them. Okay, so neurotypical people, they generally want to connect with the autistic person, but they find that there is something strange and they cannot really connect with her in the same way that that person feels that they can connect to those type of people. Why? Because there is this barrier between them. And this barrier doesn't really have to be there. It's not something that has any positive reason to be here. It's not something that is natural and goes along the neurotype. No, it's something that can actually be removed in a safe, harmless way. And what it does is that it increases the possibility of harmony between all neurotypes and of connection, even with people who have different communication styles and different needs. And that makes it easy for everybody. So that's the work that I'm doing. I'm helping people who feel that there is this barrier, this wall of glass, to break free from it, and that's great. That's a wonderful thing. And you can find out more on my YouTube channel, or on my Instagram, or on my Facebook. And I explain what is this wall of glass and what it does, and why it creates this mismatch of empathy. But from now on, don't say that autistic people don't have empathy. That's not true. Sometimes they even have too much empathy because they want to connect, but there is just this mismatch that makes it harder and that increases the possibility of misunderstanding and hurting each other. So it doesn't have to be this way, but we need more education or more understanding and more acceptance. So thank you for watching. Leave me a comment if that makes sense, and talk to you soon. Bye.